Imagine your daughter-in-law pushing you to the ground in front of everyone at a party, all because you spilled a glass of wine. I was there, in that mansion in Madrid, and I saw the betrayal in Arturo's eyes. What no one tells you is that some family betrayals run so deep, they're just waiting for the perfect storm to be exposed. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your own home has become a stage where you're just a forgotten prop. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of Arturo, a 75-year-old patriarch who, after a lifetime of hard work, was humiliated by his own family. I'll show you how a moment of clumsiness and an act of rage exposed a secret that was hidden right under their noses. But most importantly, you'll learn that the truth always finds a way to come out, even when no one is watching. Every second matters in this story, because if you ignore this lesson, you risk being silenced by those who want to hide the truth. Stay with me until the very end to discover. The one thing Arturo's daughter-in-law didn't know, that her cruelty wasn't a secret. The cameras were already rolling. You won't believe what Javier, Arturo's son, did when he saw the footage. I'm Arturo Ramirez, 75 years old, born and raised in Madrid. Most of my life I worked as a mechanic, one of those old school ones who could fix anything by ear and instinct before computers took over. My hands are calloused and a little stiff now, thanks to arthritis, but they still remember the shape of every wrench I've held. I live in the same house where I raised my son, Javier. It's changed a lot over the years, especially since he married Elena. What used to be a warm, cluttered home now looks like one of those magazines they keep on the glass coffee table, shiny, cold, untouchable. The morning of the party I woke up to noise, not the familiar kind, like the radio humming or the kettle whistling, but sharp instructions, rushed footsteps, and Elena shouting things like, "Move that," "Centerpiece, it's crooked," or "Who approved those flowers?" I stayed upstairs longer than usual, giving them space. I've learned that, in my own house, silence is sometimes the only room I still own. By noon, the caterers had arrived. I watched from the hallway, unseen, as young men in black vests moved about like clockwork. Elena paced behind them, checking every tray, fixing imaginary flaws. She wore a white dress that must have cost more than my entire wardrobe. When she caught me watching, she smiled. Not the warm kind, but the polite, tight-lipped one that says, "Don't interfere," so I didn't. Javier greeted me later, gave me a quick hug and a kiss on the cheek. "Thanks for letting us host it here, Papa," he said, as if I had a real choice. The house is technically still mine, but only on paper. In practice, I live in the upstairs room with a view of the alley and try not to disturb the perfect world downstairs. I nodded and told him the place looked beautiful. He looked tired behind the smile. That boy always had a soft heart, but Elena, she hardened it over the years. Guests began arriving around 4 p.m. Neighbors, colleagues, a few faces I didn't recognize. Someone had hired a videographer, Javier's friend, I think, to film the event. He had one of those small shoulder rigs and kept weaving through the crowd like a fly on the wall. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just took my usual spot by the garden window, where I could sip my soda and greet people one by one. I was happy to see a few old friends from the garage days. They hugged me like I still mattered. Dinner was around 7. Long white tables stretched across the backyard. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, if you ask me. The kind of perfection that makes you afraid to breathe wrong. Elena gave a speech, thanking everyone for coming, praising Javier for these wonderful 25 years of partnership. She didn't mention me, not even once. I was just the old man in the back, clapping along with the rest. It was during dessert when it happened. I'd gotten up to greet Doña Marisa, an old friend of my late wife's who had just arrived late. As I made my way through the crowded patio, my foot caught slightly on the uneven tile, an old flaw I always meant to fix, but never did. At that exact moment, a waiter passed by holding a tray with wine glasses. I bumped him, just slightly, but enough. A glass of red wine flew straight through the air and landed on Elena's pristine white dress. The splash was instant, vivid, like blood on snow. For a second, time froze. The music kept playing for a few beats, and then someone gasped. I turned immediately to apologize, my hands up, my voice trembling with embarrassment. But before I could say a word, she stepped forward and pushed me, hard. My knees buckled, I stumbled backwards and hit the ground hard, my left shoulder scraping against the edge of a chair. The chatter died instantly. Music cut. Forks froze mid-air. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears as I looked up at her. Elena stood above me, lips parted in shock, but no apology came. Just that same look of disgust, as if I were some stain on her celebration, not her father-in-law, not the man who raised the man she claimed to love. No one moved at first. A silence like that doesn't happen often. It's the kind that only visits when something has broken deeply. It wasn't just a fall. It was a fracture in the story they had been trying to tell all night. I heard a chair scrape back and saw Javier finally rush forward. "Papa, are you okay?" he whispered, helping me up with trembling hands. My legs felt weak, but I stood, brushing off my pants with more shame than pain. My pride stung more than my body. "I'm fine," I muttered, even though my shoulder throbbed. I didn't want to make a scene. I never wanted to be the center of attention, especially not like that. But as I looked around, I could feel the eyes on me. Not out of pity, but confusion, discomfort. Guests, whispering. Behind napkins. Elena stepped back, trying to smooth her dress, dabbing at the red with a cloth someone handed her. "It was an accident," she said loudly, too loudly, as if to control the narrative. "He bumped the waiter. It happens." That's when I saw it. The videographer standing near the garden, camera still resting on his shoulder. He hadn't stopped recording. He didn't lower his lens or look away. His face was pale, stunned, like the rest, but he had captured it all. Every second. From the spill to the shove to the silence. I don't know if Elena saw him then, but I did. And something inside me shifted. I stayed quiet for the rest of the night. I sat in a corner, declining dessert, declining conversation. Javier hovered now and then, apologizing without words. I could see it in his eyes. Conflict, shame, confusion. Elena kept her distance, busying herself with guests, trying to pretend everything was fine. But it wasn't. Something had cracked open. A fault line that wouldn't be, covered with dessert platters and floral arrangements. Around midnight, the party began to thin. Laughter returned slowly, awkwardly. People started leaving, patting me gently on the back, whispering things like, "Take care," or "She didn't mean it." But I could see in their eyes they weren't sure. That image of the old man on the ground was now part of their memory of the evening, no matter how much Elena tried to smile it away. The fairy tale had a glitch. Back inside, I walked upstairs slowly, one hand on the railing. My shoulder was stiff and my legs trembled from the long day. When I reached my room, I closed the door and sat on the bed. The house below still buzzed faintly with cleanup noises, but in my room, it was quiet. I stared at the wall for a long time. The push wasn't what hurt the most. It was the ease with which she had done it. The certainty, like I had no weight anymore. Then there was a knock, a soft one. I opened the door, and it was David, the videographer, Javier's. A friend, a quiet kid, always polite, never intrusive. He held his camera by his side and looked uncomfortable. "Don Arturo, can I speak to you for a moment?" he asked. I nodded, and he stepped in, closing the door behind him. His hands were trembling slightly. David didn't sit. He just stood near the door, shifting his weight, glancing at me, then at the floor. "I didn't know that was going to happen," he said finally. "I was filming the toast, and then, well, I just kept rolling. I have the whole thing on tape." He paused, then added, "Including the shove." I nodded slowly. I already knew. I had seen the lens locked on me even as I fell. He looked down at his camera. "I wanted to ask you before I did anything with it. Javier hired me to make a highlight reel for their anniversary video, but after what happened, I figured, maybe you should decide what to do with the footage. That boy, no more than 30, stood there like he was carrying a ticking bomb in his hands, and in a way, he was. The truth, captured, unedited, unfiltered, in high definition. I reached out and gestured for the camera. He hesitated for a second, then handed it over. It was heavier than I expected. I turned it on, and after a few clicks, there it was. The clip, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, my shuffle through the crowd, the spill. Elena's face twisting, her hands on my chest, the fall, my face frozen in shock, the silence. It played like a short film, but there was no need for sound design or effects. Reality was enough. I didn't cry, not then, but my hands trembled slightly as I paused the footage. "Thank you," I said, handing it back. David nodded. "Do you want me to delete it?" he asked. I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said. "Save it. Just don't share it with anyone else." "Not yet." He gave me a relieved look and promised to keep it safe. Then he left, leaving me alone with 1,000 thoughts I wasn't ready to name. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant clatter of dishes and murmurs as the last of the guests trickled out. Every sound felt exaggerated in the dark. I kept replaying the shove in my mind, not just physically, but emotionally. How easily she discarded me in front of everyone, not a stranger, her husband's father, her son's grandfather, the man who paid for this house with years of oil-stained hands. Around 3 a.m., I got up. I went to the bookshelf in my room, pulled down the old photo album with cracked leather corners. I flipped through pages of yellowed memories, my wife in her apron, Javier as a boy with a missing front tooth, the first car I rebuilt in the driveway. That was the life I built. That was my legacy. Not the spectacle downstairs, not the marble floors or the champagne fountains. Me, that boy, that woman, that home. And suddenly I knew. I couldn't let this become the new story of our family, the one where an old man becomes an inconvenience to be shoved out of the way. I had spent a lifetime building, guiding, and loving. I wasn't going to be erased in one night, and I wasn't going to seek revenge either. That would be too easy, too small. What I wanted was something different: truth, dignity, and a decision no one saw coming. So I made a plan, not out of anger, but out of clarity. In the morning, I would call my lawyer. The house was still in my name. The documents were old, but the ink was still valid. I had a right to decide what happened next. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of my own power return, not as force, but as stillness, as resolve. The morning after felt colder than usual, though the sun was out. I dressed slowly, each button of my shirt fastened with fingers that had fixed carburetors and bicycle chains, now trembling slightly. I made myself a cup of coffee, no fancy espresso machine, just the old metal pot on the stove that hissed like it had something to say. Downstairs, there was silence, the kind that only comes after too much pretending. Javier came into the kitchen just as I was finishing my toast. His tie was undone, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked at me like he wanted to speak, but didn't know where to begin. I didn't help him. I just poured another coffee and pushed the mug toward him. He sat across from me, wordless for a moment, then finally said, "Papa, about last night." I raised a hand, gently. "You don't need to explain," I said. "I know it was a mess. I also know you're stuck in the middle." He looked down, ashamed. "Elena didn't mean to—" I stopped him again. "Don't protect what doesn't deserve protecting, hijo." My voice wasn't angry, just tired, honest. He looked up, eyes wet, and nodded slowly. That's when I saw it, the boy in him, still there beneath the weight of compromise. "I saw the footage," I told him. "David showed me." That froze him. He blinked once. "He filmed it?" I nodded. "All of it." I watched his face change. Shock, then panic, deeper, then something, a kind of grief. I didn't know. he whispered. I didn't even see it clearly when it happened. I was talking to a guest. Then I heard the silence. I nodded again. We both remembered that silence too well. I'm not going to make this public, I said. I'm not looking to shame her. That's not who I am. But I also won't pretend nothing happened. Javier swallowed hard. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice small. I looked him in the eye. Take back my place in this house. In this family. Not with shouting, but with truth. With choices that matter. I asked him if he remembered the papers I kept in the metal box under my bed. The ones his mother and I signed decades ago. The title deed, the will, the notarized proof that this house was never transferred, despite all of Elena's efforts to modernize everything. He nodded. Yes, you kept it all. I smiled faintly. Good, because I'm not going anywhere. Not until I say it's time. I didn't need to raise my voice. The words landed heavier that way. Javier just sat there quiet, holding his mug with both hands, like it was the only solid thing left. I stood, patted his shoulder, and walked to the hallway. The house felt different already, not because anything had changed yet, but because I had. I had remembered who I was. I called my lawyer that afternoon. We hadn't spoken in years, but he remembered me right away. Arturo, still kicking, I see, he joked. I laughed for the first time in 2 days. More than kicking, amigo, I said. I need to update some documents, and I need to add a clause. He asked what kind. I told him it was time to protect myself from the people inside my own walls. The lawyer came 2 days later. His name is Emilio, a man with white eyebrows like painted brushstrokes and a voice that still carried courtroom confidence. He stepped into the house with a leather briefcase and a respectful nod. Elena wasn't home. She had gone out for some brunch event, still clinging to appearances like they could erase what happened. Good. I didn't want her here, not yet. Emilio and I sat in the same dining room where the incident happened. He laid out the documents on the table, asked for some IDs, and began reviewing the old titles. Javier hovered nearby, unsure if he should sit or leave. I invited him to stay. It's your family too, I told him. Better you hear it all. Emilio took his time, reading aloud, confirming clauses. Then he handed me a pen. Ready when you are. Don Arturo. I signed with a firm hand. Arthritis be damned. I signed not to punish but to protect. A few updated clauses, one crucial amendment. I was putting the house in a living trust to be controlled by me until my death or voluntary relinquishment. No changes could be made without my explicit consent. Javier watched every stroke of the pen. I could feel his conflict, but also his relief. He wasn't fighting me. He was watching someone he loved finally take back his dignity. Emilio also helped me draft a letter. A simple one page, clear language. I wanted it delivered to Elena by hand, not hidden in drawers or whispered in hallways. When we finished, Emilio shook my hand firmly and left with a respectful smile. You're a rare man, Arturo, he said at the door. I didn't answer, I just nodded. I wasn't feeling rare, I was feeling real. That evening, when Elena returned, she acted like everything was back to normal. She waltzed into the kitchen, kissed Javier's cheek, ignored me entirely. I waited. I let her serve herself a glass of white wine, scroll through her phone, laugh at some message. Then I slid the envelope across the counter. She glanced at it, confused. What's this? She asked. I didn't speak. I just looked at her. She opened it. I watched her eyes scan the letter. Her mouth tightened as she reached the second paragraph. Her fingers gripped the edge of the paper like she wanted to crumple it, but didn't dare. She looked up, finally meeting my eyes. You're doing this now. After everything I've done for this house, she spat. I kept my voice even. Exactly because of everything you've done, or forgotten. Javier stepped in then, gently. Elena, maybe you should sit down. But she didn't. She stood there, trembling with indignation. You're painting me like a monster, she said. I made this house beautiful. I gave it value. I couldn't help but smile, just slightly. "You gave it marble floors," I replied, "but you stripped out the heart." She stormed out without saying another word. I heard her heels echo down the hallway like gavel strikes. Javier and I sat in silence for a moment, the envelope still open on the counter. I could breathe again, not because she left, but because I had finally spoken in a language she couldn't ignore: action. That night the house was unusually quiet again, but this silence was different, less like tension, more like space being cleared. I sat in the living room alone, the TV on mute, watching the flicker of some documentary I wasn't really paying attention to. For the first time in a long while, I felt the house breathing with me instead of against me, not because it had changed, but because I had reminded it who I was. Javier came to sit beside me. He didn't say much at first, just passed me a cup of tea, the way his mother used to do when words weren't enough. After a while, he said, "I should have seen it sooner, Papa." His voice cracked a little. How far we let things drift. I looked at him, not with blame, but with the quiet recognition of someone who also missed the signs. "We all drift sometimes," I said, "but the shore is always there. You just have to decide when to swim back." The following morning, I woke up early. The old habit of years working in the shop never left me. I stood on the balcony with my coffee, watching the city wake up. The bakery truck passed with its usual screech, and two neighborhood kids chased each other down the street. Backpacks, bouncing. It reminded me of when Javier was little, running with scraped knees and wild laughter. I smiled. That was the world I had built. It still existed, even beneath all the noise of modernity. Later that day, David came by again. He had something for me, an edited version of the party video. "I made 2 versions," he said. "One with everything, and one just showing the good moments. I thought maybe you'd want to choose what gets shared." I took the flash drive, thanked him, and asked him to come inside. We sat in the same spot as before. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The first version played like a film, the decorations, the laughter, the toasts, and then, unfiltered, the moment of impact. Elena's hand, my stumble, the stunned silence. But David had done something I hadn't expected. After the fall, he included slow cuts of guests' reactions, people whispering, some looking away in discomfort, some watching me with concern. Then it faded into black. The second version skipped that moment entirely. A clean reel, smiling faces, dancing, cake cutting, Elena laughing. It was beautiful. Empty, but beautiful. When it ended, David looked at me and said, "I can send whichever you prefer to the family, or none at all." I sat back, the screen dark in front of me, and exhaled slowly. "Keep them both," I said, "but don't share either one yet. I have an idea." That evening, I printed photos, old ones. I went down to the basement where the boxes were stored. Birthdays, anniversaries, blurry snapshots from disposable cameras. I chose 15 of them and laid them across the dining table. Then I called Javier and asked him to help me set up the projector for a family dinner the next night. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Of course, Papa." The next 24 hours were strange. Eleanor didn't speak to me. She moved through the house like a guest, not a host. She avoided eye contact and stayed mostly in their room. I didn't push her. I didn't need to. She was already hearing the echo of her own actions in the silence around her. When the evening came, I made something simple, lentil stew, the way my wife used to make it. The smell filled the house slowly, softening the sharp edges of the past few days. I set the table for 3, no guests, no photographers, no crystal glasses, just ceramic bowls, cloth napkins, and the quiet warmth of something homemade. Javier arrived first, carrying the projector. Elena followed, cautiously, like someone stepping into unfamiliar territory. She looked surprised by the setup, the old photos lined up, the aroma in the air, the candles flickering softly. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tentative. I gestured to the table. "Dinner," I said. Family dinner. We used to do these, remember? She didn't answer, but she sat down. Her movements were stiffer than usual, as if unsure of the rules now that control had shifted. Javier helped me plug in the projector. We ate in near silence. After dinner, dimmed the lights and started the slideshow. One by one, the images came to life on the wall. Javier as a baby in a wash basin, my wife holding him with flour on her hands, the old garage with its dented sign. Moments stitched from years that no one had posted online or edited for public approval. Just real life, messy, full, flawed, and precious. Elena watched quietly. I noticed her hand resting on the table, fidgeting with the napkin. Then came one photo of me and Javier, sitting on the old blue truck, both covered in grease, both laughing. I paused there, let the silence stretch. That was the day he changed his first tire, I said. He was 9. Thought he broke the wrench. We laughed for 20 minutes straight. Javier smiled, eyes wet. Elena lowered her gaze. For once, there was nothing for her to perfect. After the slideshow, I said, "We built this life with our hands, with mistakes and little victories. It may not be sleek or modern, but it's real, and it's mine. I'm not erasing any of it." I let that hang in the air. Then I added, "No one gets to rewrite the past just because it doesn't fit their version of beauty." Javier nodded. Elena said nothing, but she didn't leave. I looked at them both. What happened at the party can't be undone, but it can be remembered the right way, not to punish, but to remind us of what happens when we forget who we are. I reached for the projector remote. David recorded everything. I asked him to hold on to it. I won't use it against anyone, but I won't pretend it didn't happen either. That statement lingered like incense in the air. Elena finally looked at me, really looked, and in that moment, something cracked. Not in me, but in her. Not a collapse, but a shift. Her eyes, usually sharp and alert, softened into something almost human. "I lost myself trying to impress people who don't even know us," she said, voice low. "And I pushed away the one person who never asked for anything but respect." We didn't hug. No, dramatic music played. But something shifted in the house that night, like the furniture had moved an inch closer, like the walls had exhaled. I knew forgiveness would take time. Maybe it would never be full, but I had made my place clear, not with anger, but with presence. And that, for once, was enough. The following morning I woke up before the sun. It was a habit from the garage days, rising before the world did, when the silence still belonged to you. I made coffee and sat on the back steps, watching the sky shift from navy to pale orange. Birds stirred in the trees, and the first bus passed on the avenue, hissing along its route. My bones ached, but not in the way they did before. There was something lighter in my chest, like I'd stopped holding my breath. Javier joined me a few minutes later. He didn't say much, just sat beside me and handed me a slice of toast with butter. "She didn't sleep," he said quietly. I could hear her pacing. I nodded, but didn't offer advice. That wasn't my job. Sometimes people need to walk in circles before they decide which direction matters. I sipped my coffee, feeling its warmth settle into my ribs like a reminder that I was still here, still steady. Around midday, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Doña Marisa, the same one I'd tried to greet before the fall. She held a small tin of cookies and wore her usual pink shawl, the one with frayed corners. "I saw what happened," she said softly. "I didn't know if I should come earlier, but I just wanted to say you didn't deserve that." Her voice cracked. "No one does." I invited her in and poured her a coffee. We sat at the kitchen table like old neighbors do. No rush, no filter. She told me what others had said after the party. How people were talking, how some were angry, some confused, but most felt something shift that night. "You reminded everyone that dignity still means something," she said, "even when it's quiet." That stuck with me. I didn't need banners or revenge, just the quiet echo of truth doing its job. That afternoon I walked through each room of the house, not inspecting, just remembering. Each wall had a memory, the dent in the hallway from Javier's first skateboard, the spot near the window where my wife used to stand and hum while folding laundry. These weren't imperfections, they were the soul of the place. And I realized I wasn't trying to freeze time or reverse changes. I was simply reclaiming meaning where it had been scrubbed out. In the garage, I found an old wooden crate labeled Papa's Tools. Inside were my favorite wrenches, rusted a bit, but still solid. I pulled them out one by one, cleaning them with a rag. It wasn't about fixing anything, it was about remembering what my hands could still do. When I finished, I placed the cleanest wrench on the shelf, right in the open. A small, quiet symbol. I was still useful, still me. That evening, Elena approached me. No makeup, hair tied back, wearing a plain sweater instead. Of her usual designer armor, she stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking. "Do you still want me here?" she asked. Her voice wasn't defensive anymore. It was raw, uncertain. I studied her face. "I want respect in my home," I said calmly. "If you can offer that, you're welcome. If not, the door isn't locked." She nodded. No arguments, no performance. Just a quiet, heavy nod. And then, to my surprise, she sat beside me. Not to negotiate or apologize further, but just to sit. We watched. The last of the light disappear through the window. Two people learning how to begin again without pretending nothing happened. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at home settled into something quieter, more fragile but honest. Elena didn't revert to her old ways. She didn't try to take over the house again or parade her control in subtle remarks. Instead, she moved more carefully, more attentively. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was different. And sometimes, different is. Enough to begin with. Javier seemed lighter too. He laughed more, even if briefly. He started leaving work a little earlier, helping me water the garden, asking questions about old times. One afternoon, he brought down a box of family videos I hadn't seen in years, VHS tapes with handwritten labels in my wife's handwriting, Navidad, 1993, Javi's 10th, Boda de Clara y Tomás. We watched them together on an old player I'd stored in the garage. Grainy footage, bad lighting, but hearts so full you could feel them through the screen. Elena joined us once. Just once. She sat silently through most of it, then excused herself after 15 minutes. But I noticed her eyes shimmer before she stood. I didn't call her back. Everyone processes guilt differently. What mattered was that the cracks had started to breathe, and sometimes that's how light gets in. A week after the dinner, I visited David's studio. It was a small space above a florist's shop with a heavy wooden door and walls covered. In stills from weddings, birthdays, even funerals, he welcomed me with the respect of someone who understood he'd witnessed more than just a moment. He had filmed a turning point. I handed him a small envelope. Inside, a check and a handwritten note. "Not for the video," it read. "For the truth. Thank you for not looking away." He read it twice. "Don Arturo," he said, his voice thick, "I just did my job." I shook my head. "No," I replied. "You did more. You preserved something that others would have hidden. That matters." He promised to keep the footage safe, unreleased unless I ever needed it. I believed him. Sometimes the quietest people carry the deepest integrity. When I returned home that afternoon, I found something on my bed. A folded note, written in Elena's cursive. Just 4 lines. "I'm learning to listen. I was wrong. Thank you for not yelling, even when I deserved it. E." I held the paper in my hand for a long time. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. The kind of gesture that doesn't erase a bruise, but tells you someone noticed it. The next day, I invited Doña Marisa and 2 of my old friends for lunch. I cooked paella out in the yard like we used to. Javier helped with the fire. Elena set the table, quietly, without fanfare. When we sat down to eat, laughter returned, stories flowed. and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. At one point, as we were cracking jokes about our younger days, Javier turned to me and said, "You know, Papa, I think this is what the house was missing." I raised an eyebrow. "Paella?" I joked. He smiled. "No, you." And in that moment, with sun on my face, laughter in my ears, and the smell of saffron in the air, I knew he meant it. The days turned into weeks, and little by little, life settled into something that felt more like harmony than habit. The house still had its modern edges. Elena's taste hadn't changed overnight, but now it also smelled like coffee in the mornings again, like old books left open, like a home lived in, not just showcased. I even heard music playing from the kitchen one afternoon. Not the classical strings she used to blast, but something softer. Spanish boleros, my wife's favorites. I started fixing things again, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted to. The door hinge that had squeaked for months, the garden hose that leaked just enough to be annoying, even the front gate latch which never quite caught. These were small things, yes, but they were symbols. Every repair was like laying another brick of myself back into the foundation of this house, reclaiming space with each twist of the wrench. One afternoon, while I was changing a bulb in the hallway, Eleanor approached with a small potted plant in her hands, a rosemary bush. "I thought it might belong better in the kitchen than the centerpiece of the table," she said. Her voice was light, but her eyes searched mine, like she was asking for permission to plant herself again. I took the pot and nodded. "Smells like Sundays," I said, and she smiled, truly smiled, for the first time since the party. Javier, meanwhile, had begun joining me more regularly in the garage. We didn't talk much while we worked. We didn't need to. Our silence was filled with purpose, tools clinking, wood sanding, ideas exchanged in half sentences. One evening he brought in an old chair his mother had kept in the attic. "Think we could fix it?" he asked. I ran my hand over the cracked leg and said, "We've fixed worse." He grinned like a boy again. That chair became our quiet project. Something sacred, a little beat up, a little forgotten, but full of meaning. As we stripped the old varnish and re-glued the joints, I realized how much healing looked like that. Slow, methodical, sometimes messy, but always worth it. Every scratch told a story. Every repair was a promise that we weren't giving up on what still had value. Around the third week, I got a call from Emilio, my lawyer. "Just checking in," he said, "making sure everything feels right." I told him it did, that the house wasn't just mine on paper anymore. It felt like mine in spirit, too. He chuckled. "You know," he said, "a lot of people your age try to disappear quietly. You did the opposite." I laughed, too. Maybe I just wasn't ready to be invisible. That evening, while reviewing some old papers, I found a birthday card tucked inside a book. It was from Javier, age 14. The handwriting crooked, the message simple. "To the best Papa, I want to be like you when I grow up." I read it 3 times. That boy, the one who wrote those words, he was still here. And I realized I had done more than reclaim a house. I had brought my son back to himself. Later that night, I took the card downstairs and left it on his pillow. No note, no comment. Just the card, a relic of love untouched by time. And when he found it, hours later, I heard his breath hitch from the hallway. He didn't say anything the next morning, but he hugged me twice before leaving for work. And that was more than enough. A month after the party, Elena suggested we host a small Sunday lunch, just family, nothing extravagant. She asked me what I thought. I was surprised by the question itself. Not long ago, she would have planned everything without asking. I told her it was a good idea, as long as the food was simple and everyone felt welcome. "Even with paper napkins," I joked. She rolled her eyes and said, "Especially with paper napkins." The lunch was calm. Just me, Javier, Elena, and her sister Rosa with her 2 teenagers. We ate tortilla, ensalada rusa, and flan. No caterers, no gold-rimmed plates, just laughter and crumbs on the tablecloth. At one point, Rosa turned to me and said, "Arturo, this house feels different lately. Warmer." I smiled. Houses change when people do. She nodded, not prying, but understanding. After everyone left, I stayed behind in the kitchen to wash the dishes. Elena joined me, drying each plate with a towel. We worked in rhythm, not talking much. Then she said, "I was ashamed, you know, when I saw the video." I didn't answer right away. I just passed her another plate. She continued, "Not just of what I did, but of how easy it was for me to forget who you are." That moment hung in the air, heavier than the heat from the water. I looked at her and said softly, "The world moves fast, Elena, but roots don't grow in speed. They grow in stillness." She folded the towel in her hands and nodded, as if trying to fold that thought into herself too. "I want to try again," she said. "Not to impress anyone, just to belong here, the way you do." I didn't say yes or no. I didn't promise anything. I just said, "Keep showing up." That was the only deal I needed. Respect isn't a declaration, it's a repetition, a decision made quietly, day after day. She understood. At least I think she did. That night, when she lit a candle by the photo of my wife in the hallway, I knew she meant it. A few days later, I decided to visit the cemetery. I hadn't been since before the party. I brought fresh carnations, my wife's favorite, and sat on the old stone bench beside her. I told her everything, not aloud, just inside. How the house had cracked and healed, how Javier had come back to himself, how even Elena was trying. I imagined her nodding, amused, probably muttering something about how stubborn I still was. As I sat there, an elderly man passed by with a cane, tipped his hat to me and said, "It's good when they remember who you are, isn't it?" I nodded, a lump in my throat. Because yes, that was exactly it. I hadn't needed a war. I hadn't needed revenge. I just needed to be seen. And in that simple act, everything began to change. On the way home, I took the long route. Past the plaza where I taught Javier to ride a bike. Past the bakery where I used to buy Sunday bread. The city had changed, of course. Buildings taller, streets louder. But some corners still looked just as they did in the 70s. And that gave me comfort. That reminded me some foundations hold, even when the facade cracks. One evening, just as the sun was slipping below the rooftops, I heard music coming from the living room. Not the kind you'd expect from Elena. This time, it was an old zarzuela I used to play on vinyl. Curious, I walked in and found her sitting on the couch, laptop open, speakers playing softly. She looked up when she saw me. "I found your playlist," she said. It was buried in an old folder on Javier's computer. I didn't ask why she opened it. I just sat down beside her and listened. The melody carried me back decades, back to when we danced barefoot on the cold tiles while the stew simmered, back when life was hard but never hollow. I closed my eyes and tapped my finger on the armrest in time with the music. Eleanor sat still, her face calm. "I never knew you liked this kind of music," she said. I smiled. "You never asked." She winced, slightly, and I let the silence answer for both of us. That night, Javier joined us and we listened to a few more tracks. No words, no analysis, just music filling the space that once held tension. It felt like exhaling after a long breath held too tightly. At one point, Elena leaned back and whispered, "This feels like home again." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some truths are best left floating in the air, unclaimed but undeniable. The next morning, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the community council. Apparently, someone had nominated me for a small recognition, Vecino Illustre del Barrio. I laughed out loud reading it. Elena was in the hallway and asked what was so funny. I handed her the paper. She read it, then looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Pride, not pity, not forced politeness, just quiet admiration. A week later, they held the ceremony in the plaza. A small stage, some folding chairs, kids running around with balloons. Nothing fancy. Just local, honest, heartfelt. When they called my name, I stepped up with Javier beside me. He introduced me with a few words that made my chest swell. He taught me that dignity is not silence, it's presence. I looked over and saw Elena clapping, tears in her eyes. That meant more than the plaque. After the event, a group of neighbors came up to shake my hand, some asking if I could still fix an old appliance or remember how to rebuild a carburetor. I told them I couldn't kneel like I used to, but I could still guide a good pair of hands. One teenage boy even asked if I'd teach him how to restore a Vespa. "Come by next weekend," I said. "Bring patience." He grinned. Later that evening, I placed the recognition plaque on a shelf near my wife's photo. Not as a trophy, but as a marker. A reminder that being seen, not glorified, not elevated, just seen, is sometimes the rarest honor of all. Javier stood behind me. "She'd be proud," he said softly. I nodded. "She'd tell me to dust it." "Every week," I replied, and we both chuckled. That night, as I got ready for bed, I passed by the hallway mirror. I stopped and looked at myself, not out of vanity, but out of curiosity. The man looking back was older, yes, but there was something different in his eyes. A steadiness, a return. I whispered, "You're still here, viejo," and turned off the light. The following weekend, the boy with the Vespa showed up. His name was Nico, barely 17, full of questions and nervous energy. He knocked like someone unsure if he belonged. I welcomed him into the garage, showed him the workspace, and handed him a rag. "First rule," I said, "you don't touch a machine you haven't first respected." He nodded, eyes wide, like I'd just handed him a secret map. We started slowly, just observation. I taught him how to listen to the engine, to feel its weight, to notice the difference between rust and age. He asked good questions. He reminded me of Javier at that age, back when he still wore oil. Stains like badges. Elena came by with lemonade halfway through. She didn't say much, just placed the tray down and smiled. "Smells like the old days," she said. I think it was her way of saying thank you. As the days passed, Nico kept coming. One afternoon, he brought his grandfather, who turned out to be an old friend of mine from the neighborhood. We hadn't seen each other in years. We hugged with the force of two men who'd lived long enough to know how rare reunions can be. "Still teaching." Arturo?" he joked. I shrugged. "Still learning," I answered. "That's the truth of getting old. You never really stop being a student." One evening, Javier and I stood outside watching the sunset. "You know," he said, "if you wanted to start a little workshop, I'd help set it up, maybe even teach with you." I looked at him, surprised. "Thought your hands were too clean for grease these days." He laughed. "Turns out they missed it." I nodded slowly. "We'd have to start small." He smiled. "Everything worth building starts small." A few days later, I pulled out my notebook and began sketching ideas. Nothing grand, just a community garage, a place where kids could learn the basics, neighbors could fix what's broken, and stories could be passed between generations over engine blocks and coffee. Eleanor peeked over my shoulder while I was drawing. "You really think people want that?" she asked. I looked at her. "Not everyone wants perfection. Some people just want to feel useful again." She didn't argue. In fact, that same week she called a friend at the municipal office to ask about available community spaces. That gesture meant more than flowers or apologies ever could. It meant she believed in it, believed in me. And slowly, I began to realize that what I had lost in that single shove wasn't just dignity, it was direction. And now, I was finding it again, one bolt at a time. On a quiet Tuesday morning, as I was sorting tools in the garage, I found the broken watch Javier had given me on my 50th birthday. The glass was cracked and the hands frozen at 3:17. I had kept it all these years, even after it stopped working. I turned it over in my hands and smiled. Maybe it was time to fix that too. Not for the time, but for the memory. So I opened the back with a jeweler's screwdriver and began tinkering. The gears were stubborn, the screws tiny, but my fingers remembered. They always did. And as the second hand ticked back to life, I realized something. Sometimes dignity isn't about standing tall. Sometimes it's about kneeling down with grace because you believe what you're rebuilding is still worth the effort. 2 weeks later, the community center approved the use of an old municipal garage behind the school. It was dusty, full of spider webs, and hadn't seen a wrench in years, but the bones were good. When I stepped inside, I could already imagine it. Benches lined up, walls covered in tools, shelves of donated parts, and young hands learning the patience of repair. It didn't need to be perfect, it just needed to be honest. Javier helped me clean it out the first weekend. We filled 3 trash bags with broken chairs and busted fans. Nico brought his friends, and for the first time in ages, I heard young voices echo off those cement walls. Laughter, curiosity, questions that reminded me there's a future, even when you think your best years are behind you. Elena surprised us with sandwiches and thermoses of coffee. No announcement, just action. By the third Saturday, we held our first workshop. 7 kids showed up, 2 girls, 5 boys, all with different reasons for being there. Some wanted to learn about engines, others just needed something to do on the weekend. I started with the basics: how to hold a tool, how to respect the object in front of you. Machines, I told them, are like people. If you don't listen first, you'll never understand where the real problem is. After class, one of the girls, Lucia, stayed behind. She was quiet, maybe 13, with sharp eyes and grease on her cheek. "Don Arturo," she asked, "why do you do this if you don't get paid?" I thought for a moment, then said, "Because someone once taught me that the most important things we fix in life aren't things at all. They're people, and sometimes ourselves." She nodded like she understood, and maybe she did. That night, I sat in the garage alone after everyone had gone. The scent of oil and soap hung in the air, and the light from the bare bulb cast long shadows. I thought about everything that had happened, the fall, the silence, the letter, the change, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Not the kind you get from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from facing it and walking through the fire without losing yourself. Javier stopped by with beers. We didn't talk about the past, we didn't need to. He just lifted his bottle, clinked it against mine and said, "To round 2. I grinned. "I think I've lost count." We drank in silence, surrounded by engine parts and possibility. And for the first time since the fall, I felt truly grounded. Not because everything had healed, but because I had chosen not to hide. At home, Eleanor had placed a new frame on the mantel. It was a photo of the workshop, me in the center, surrounded by kids with smudged hands and bright eyes. No filters, no posing, just a moment caught in motion. Below it, in her handwriting, she'd written, "Where restoration begins." I stood there for a long time, just staring at it. Not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me that even witnesses can grow. Later that week, I printed one of the stills from David's footage, the moment right before the push. Just me, standing with a glass in hand, smiling slightly, unaware. I didn't do it to punish myself. I did it to remember. I framed it and placed it in the garage office, next to the new watch and the first wrench I ever bought. A reminder that before everything fell, I was whole, and even after, I still am. Not long after, David came by the garage one afternoon. He had a copy of the original footage in a sealed envelope. "Just in case you ever need it," he said. I took it, held it for a second, and then placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, under a stack of manuals and invoices. It was no longer a weapon. It was history. And history only becomes heavy when we try to pretend it didn't happen. I asked him to take a few new photos of the kids working, of Javier teaching, of Elena handing out coffee, real moments, honest ones. He did, and by the end of the week, we had a small gallery on the garage wall. The title above the collection read, "The Heart of Repair." Visitors stopped to look, to ask, to remember, and slowly, our little corner became more than a workshop. It became a place of testimony. Elena, to her credit, never again tried to erase the past. She didn't downplay it or explain it away. What she did was keep showing up. At dinners, at garage events, even just to water the plants I'd placed in old paint cans by the door. One evening, she turned to me while we were locking up and said, "You could have thrown me out." I looked at her and answered honestly, "You threw yourself out. I just left the door unlocked." We both knew it would never be what it once was, but something new had grown in its place. Something slower, more cautious, but rooted in truth. Javier no longer looked torn between us. He looked whole, and that, more than anything, was the greatest repair of all. The kind that tools can't reach. Months passed, the garage kept growing. We added more benches, got a small donation from the city, even started hosting night classes. I was tired some days, yes, but it was the kind of tired that felt like purpose, not burden. I had rediscovered the rhythm of usefulness, of meaning, of being needed not as a symbol, but as a man. One afternoon, Nico came running into the garage with a piece of paper waving in his hand. "I passed," he yelled. "I got into technical school." The others clapped and cheered, and I stood there watching him jump like a boy who had touched the stars. He hugged me, hard, without warning. "You changed my life," he whispered. I hugged him back and said, "No, mijo, you just needed a place to believe it was possible." That night, I walked home slower than usual. The sky above Madrid was streaked with orange and lavender, and the breeze carried the scent of jasmine from some unseen window box. I passed the bakery, now run by the grandson of the man I used to buy bread from. He waved at me. "Still fixing things, Don Arturo?" I smiled. "Always." When I reached home, I turned the key slowly, stepped inside, and breathed it in. My house, my story. My name still on the title, yes, but more importantly, my soul back in its walls. I looked at the hallway where it all began, the silence, the fall, the camera, and I realized what Elena didn't know that day wasn't just that the cameras were rolling. It was that I had spent my entire life preparing for that fall, and for the choice to rise with dignity instead of noise. Sometimes the hardest falls teach us the most about who we really are, and how we choose to rise afterward defines our true strength. Arturo's journey wasn't about proving anyone wrong, but about reclaiming his place with quiet resolve. If you've ever felt unseen in a life you helped build, or silenced when you deserve to be heard, I hope this story reminds you that your worth isn't determined by others' expectations. Your dignity matters, especially in the moments that feel most breaking. Tell me in the comments, have you faced a moment when you had to stand up for yourself, even if it was just to prove your own courage? Share if you can with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Sometimes, a simple story is all it takes to spark hope. If you'd like to hear more real stories of resilience and hidden courage, you know where to find me. Thank you for staying until the end and for believing in the power of honest human moments.